Good evening, everyone. This is the fifth week in a row that we are having these classes. So again, a very big thank you to Sudarshan and Abhijit for making this happen, and for all the friends who have joined from far and near to join us for these kind of philosophical discussions every Sunday at 5 o'clock. And it goes on for about an hour and a half. So again, a big thank you to the organizers for making this all happen. So as we move into this course, as we move to these discussions, the plot actually thickens. So we started from some basic understandings of Upanishads, then we got into creation, and now we are going into the essence of it. I think the plot is getting more and more exciting and interesting. So hopefully over the next 1 hour or so, we will dwell on this concept called the souls, the jiva. Let's see what the Upanishads and the Vedas and the Gita and the Bhagavad, they talk about the jivas. So this is a foundation for next week, perhaps, God willing. We'll do another session on jivas next week. So today's focus is going to be some basic understandings with regards to what is the Vedic concept of the jivas or Atma. So before we start the class, of course, we pray. And I'm going to start off with the Shanti mantra of Atharvana Veda. Badram Karanebihi Shrunyama Devaha Badram Pashyema Akshabihi Yajatraha Sthirai Rangair Tushtuvam Sastanobihi Vashema Devahitai Yadayuhu Swastinaha Indro Vridrashavaha Swastinaha Pusha Vishwavedaha Swastinoho Indro Arishtanemihi Swastino Bruhaspati Dadatu Yo antah pravishya mamavacha imam prashuptam sanjeevayati akhila shakti daraswadamna anyamshcha hasta charana shravanatvagadin pranan namo bhagavate purushaya tutyam lasatu shrimad ananda tirtendurno hrudambare yadvachas chandrika swanta santapam vinikrintati padavakya pramanajnan pranamya shirasa gurun Yakarishye Yatha Bhotam Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya. So good evening, everyone. So the topic for today's talk is the journey of the souls. So before we understand what is this journey of the souls, let's dwell on a few slides discussing about what is the concept of souls as per Vedic philosophy. So last week, so moving on to the next slide. So last week, we spent a lot of time in part 2 discussing about creation, how creation comes about, what is the creation of matter, how does the matter evolve?
We cannot help me now, it's okay.
How does the matter evolve from primordial matter or Mula Prakriti, and how it has become this gigantic Brahmanda, as we call it, and also this body, which is also the Pindanda. So the macrocosm and the microcosm are intimately related at various levels. So we discussed about how does this macrocosm, that is the Brahmanda, link up with Pindanda. And we also spent some time, very briefly, I think, talking about what does creation of souls actually mean. And we also revised the fact that there are certain entities as per Vedic philosophy. God or Brahman is eternal, uncreated. Jivas or the souls are eternal and uncreated. Mula Prakriti is eternal and uncreated. Chetana Prakriti or Lakshmi or Sri Tattva is also eternal and uncreated. And there are certain other entities like Karma, Kala, Avyakrita Akasha, Varnat, Shabda, stroke Vedas. These are all Anadi Nityas, entities as we call it. So let's go back to the fundamentals again, just to think about it a bit more, because it's very relevant for souls. So I initially took up, this was about 2 weeks ago, we took up a verse from Taittiriya Upanishad. Just to remind you, Taittiriya Upanishad is part of the Krishna Yajurveda. Yeah. So in Taittiriya Upanishad, there is an excellent description as to how the Supreme initiates creation. So it goes like this. So akamayat bahusyam prajayeya iti satapo atapyata sa tapastapva idam sarvam asrajata yadidam kincha tat srishtva tadeva anupravishat tad anupravisha satcha yat tyakcha abhavat. So what that verse in Taittiriya means actually is God desired, the Brahman desired, let me create. So he created various components of the universe, and with every part of modification or the creation that he made, he also decided that he is going to get into his creation. So that we discussed before, saying that this is a key concept. Tad eva anupravishati. This is the exclusive quality of how Brahman brings about the creation. Unlike a potter creates the pot and the pot exists outside the potter. Whereas for the creation of the universe, God not only creates the universe, but he also enters it. Why does he enter it? To give it reality, and also to give the volition to do its prescribed duties. It means satta, pramiti, and pravritti. So those are the three components of the activities of Brahman once he is pervaded into his creation. So satta means gives that entity the reality. Pramiti means makes that object an object of knowledge. Pravritti means it gives volition for that object to perform its function in the universe. So those are the three fundamental reasons why Brahman gets into his creation. So then we also discussed about how the same Brahman, how he brings about the various components of matter. And we discussed this verse, Tasmad va etasmad atmanaha akashaha sambhutaha akashad vayuhu vayor agnihi agner apaha adabhya prithvi prithubhya aushadayaha oshadibhyo annam annat purushaha sava esha purusho anna rasamayaha. So this is one of those beautiful statements from Taittiriya Upanishad. It comes in what's called as Brahmavalli or Brahmandavalli, which is the second adhyaya of Taittiriya Upanishad, where it discusses about how this Brahman then it makes the subtle matter increasingly grosser and then creates the five Panchabhutas and enters into the Panchabhutas. So from these two verses, we understand that God enters into everything that exists in the universe. Anything that is in existence is pervaded by the supreme consciousness. So this is a fundamental dictum of Vedic philosophy. There is nothing in this universe or there is nothing in this existence that does not have the pervasion of the supreme being. So be it as it may, now we need to start thinking about, it's all well and good about Brahmanda and Pindanda, which is this body. What about the jivas themselves and what is their position? So just to remind you about this, we discussed that before creation, that is in the Pralaya Kala, that is pre-creation state, we discussed about the Nasadiya Sukta of Rigved, Nasadasin, no Sadasit Talanim. So none of these existed. And there we also discussed that the jivas existed in a suspended animation. The jivas existed in a suspended animation in Pralaya. Okay, so then when they get into creation, they get their volition, their existence, their objecthood of knowledge, and so on. And we'll discuss it in the subsequent slide. Slides. This concept of supreme being, who is entered in every aspect of creation, is very beautifully brought out in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So it's moving on to the next slide, Abhijit. So this is the slide that I think is one of the key foundational philosophies of Vedanta, is what's called as the Antaryami Brahmanam of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So the Antaryami Brahmanam of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is, let me give you a background of this particular Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So as you know, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is part of the Shukla Yajurveda. Now, there are two recensions of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. One is Kanva recension and the other one is called Madhyandina recension. So there are two types of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad that have come down to us over thousands of years. Now, the Kanva recension is, there is a particular Brahmanam called Antaryami Brahmanam of this particular recension. So this this whole third adhyaya of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is fascinating. It is essentially a philosophical discussion. It is an exciting chapter in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. I would strongly urge you to get into the third adhyaya. So the background to this third adhyaya is there was once a king called Janaka in Videha. He was a very, very knowledgeable and a very philosophical person. So once he decides that he wants to have a philosophical discourse, a conference as it were, and he invited all the great philosophers of India to his kingdom, and there was a philosophical discourse that happened. Now Janaka said, whoever is the best philosopher of the land gets 1,000 cows, and the horn of each cow will have a gold coin attached to it. So that was the prize to the top philosopher of India. So many philosophers came there. To name a few, Yagya, Uddalaka Aruni, Usastva, Kahola, Shaukalya, Artabhaga. So these were all great philosophers of their time. We have forgotten all these philosophers these days, but I think if you go back to those chapters, you will understand the profound thoughts in these philosophers. So those philosophers, they all got together. Yajnavalkya, he was one of the greatest Vedic philosophers who existed in his time. He proclaimed that he was the greatest philosopher, that he was going to take all the 1,000 cows and all the gold coins, and he was going to leave the conference. At that point, other philosophers come in and say, look, you can't take the 1,000 cows. We are going to ask you some questions. And if you can give us the correct answers to those questions, then we will accept that you are the greatest philosopher. So that is how the scene is set for the beginning of this third adhyaya. So where each philosopher puts forth a question to Yajnavalkya, and Yajnavalkya then answers those questions. So this particular Antaryami Brahmanam is, there was a great philosopher called Ashvalayana. So Ashvalayana asks this question to Yajnavalkya. And this is a discussion about this Antaryami and this concept called Sutra. Who is the Sutra? Now, last week we discussed, we spent a couple of minutes talking about Garuda and what is his place in Vedic philosophy. And the previous week we discussed about Rudra, and we discussed about what his place in Vedic philosophy. So in this particular Brahmanam, the discussion starts with Ashvalayana actually asking not Ashvalayana, I'm sorry, Uddalaka Aruni asking this question. So Uddalaka Aruni is the philosopher who's asking this question. He says, Veta nutvam kapya tat sutram Yancha lokaha, parashta lokaha, sarvani cha bhutani, sandrupdani, bhavanti iti, vetanutvam kapya, tam antaryaminam ya imam cha lokam, param cha lokam, sarvani chani yo antaro yamayati. So basically what Uddalaka Aruni is asking Yajnavalkya is, do you know that particular entity which is called the Sutram, which holds the whole universe together? Do you know that entity which is called the Antaryami, who is inside the Sutram and holding the whole universe together? Is the question that Uddalaka Aruni is asking Yajnavalkya. So Yajnavalkya gives an answer immediately. He says, Vayurvai Gautama Tat Sutram. So that's what he answers. He says, Vayuhu or Mukhya Prana is the Sutram. Sutra means the thread. He is the thread. It says Vayu or Mukhya Prana is the thread that holds the whole universe together. And then Uddalaka Aruni says, okay, Yajnavalkya, who is the Antaryami? Can you tell me who is the Antaryami here? So that is the next slide. So immediately what happens is Yajnavalkya goes into this huge discussion of the cosmic Antaryami. I don't plan to discuss every mantra here. So basically what Yajnavalkya goes on to give is, he gives an illustration of every component of the universe, every aspect of the cosmos, including the jivas. And he goes on to say, they not only have the Mukhya Prana or Vayu who is holding them together, but also inside that Mukhya Prana or Vayu is this Antaryami, who is the supreme being who is holding them together. So the first mantra, for example, he says, Yaha Prithivya Tishtan Prithivya Antaro Yam Prithvi na Veda Yasya Prithvi Shariran Yaha Prithivim Antaro Yamayati Yeshate Atma Antaryami Amrutaha. Okay? So this is one of the most important verses. Yeshata Atma Antaryami Amruta. So there is Atma and there is Antaratma. So what Yajnavalkya is saying here is, so let's take this word Prithivya. So who is this Prithivya? The Prithivya, and as we discussed before, we need to go to the Sanskrit Niruktam to understand who Prithivya is. So this Prithivya is basically Garuda. Yeah. So the first question, the Yajnavalkya says, he who is inside Garuda, whom the Garuda does not know fully, whose body is Garuda, and who controls Garuda, that person is Yeshate Atma Antaryami Amrutaha. And I have listed the meaning of each word there. What is Atma? What is Antara? What is Yamayati? So Atma means he who is the master or the governor. Antara means he who is separate. So although God is in all his creation, he is separate from his creation. He is entirely different from his creation. What does Yamayati mean? Yamayati means he is inside his creation, but still he governs it. Antar means independent. Yamin means one who governs. Amruta means eternal or deathless. So that describes this Antaryamin who is there in every component and every aspect of this universe. So this particular Brahmanam is key. So what I would suggest is read this over the next few days. It's available, just Google it, just try and understand this. The key concepts here is that there are 21 entities that are discussed here. It goes on to Prithivya, Apsu, Agnav, Antarikshe, and so on. And there is one that I have marked in red box, which is Yaha Sarveshu Bhuteshu Tishtan Sarvebhyo Bhutebhyo Antaro Yam Sarvani Bhutani Naveda Yasya Sarvani Bhutani Shariram Yaha Sarvani Bhutani Antaro Yamayati Yeshata Atma Antaryami Amrutaha. So what that means is Sarveshu Bhuteshu. Bhutas, what are bhutas? So bhuteshu here, basically what it means is, bhutas is an interesting Sanskrit word. There are various meanings to bhutas. The first one is the panchabhutas that you know. They are also called bhutas, but they are jadas. But primarily, bhuta means that which has the capacity to uplift itself. Okay? That is called, that which has bhuti is bhuta. So it is the jivas. Jivas are called bhutas in the primary sense. Then you have Mahat Bhutam. Vishnu is called Mahat Bhutam. Yeah. So Bhuta primarily means Jivas. So what this particular mantra basically says is, in all the Bhutas, that is in all the Jivas, there is this Antaryamin who is inside it. But these Jivas do not know this Antaryamin. And this Antaryamin is the one who is very different from the Jivas, but still controls the Jivas' journey in their lives. Okay? So that is a key verse that gives you a hint and an idea as to what is it that I'm getting at in my next slide. So as we move to the next slide, the same concept of the Antaryamin, I just want to, I put these two verses from Gita to remind ourselves, because we are doing Gita on Wednesdays. Chapter 7, 7th verse. Krishna says, Mattaha paradaram nanya kinchidasti dhananjaya Mayi sarvamidam protram sutre maniganaiva. So even in that verse, he is talking about the sutra. Sutra is that the thread that holds the universe together. So in the Antaryami Brahmanam, it started off with saying that the Mukhya Prana or the Vayu is the sutra, and inside that Mukhya Prana is the Antaryamin, which is the supreme being, and so he is also called the sutra. And then Krishna here actually confirms that for us, saying, Mayi, I am Sarvamidam Protam Sutre Manigana Iva. I am holding the whole universe. Okay? And again, there is another beautiful verse in the 9th chapter. Most of you would be familiar with this. Maya tatam idam sarvam jagat avyakta murtina. This is Maya tatam. Tatam means all pervasive, to pervade. That is the meaning for tatam. So here Krishna is saying, I have pervaded the whole existence. Avyakta murtina. And he says, I have a very unmanifested form, which means that I have a very non-material form. In my non-material form, I have pervaded this entire universe. So again, these two verses in the Gita directly link up with the Antaryami Brahmanam of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and then it gives us a confirmed view that as per Vedas, every entity in existence is pervaded by the Supreme Being, which also includes the jivas. So this is something that we need to understand for today's class and the next week as well, to understand that that Supreme Being, the witness as we call it, is actually sitting inside us. Okay? So now, yes, we understand the jiva is different from the material body. So we discussed that last week. And inside the jiva is the Antaryamin, which is the supreme soul or the super soul who is sitting inside. And then we also discussed that this jiva has come into creation. And the creation of jiva essentially means that it acquires a body. And with that body, it interacts with the external world. So that is the creation for the jivas. Now, if you take the Taittiriya Upanishad, which said that, Tat Srishtva Tadeva Anupravishata, and as I said, the Brahmanda and Pindanda are the same, then we need to start thinking about this Pindanda, so this body. So, and we discussed this very briefly, I think, last week. So this body of ours has got 5 coverings as per Vedic philosophy. All the 5 coverings are made of matter. So that's Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manonmaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and Anandamaya Kosha. So these are the 5 coverings of the soul. And inside the soul is the Antaryami. Antara Atma, as he is called. If Jiva is called Atma, God, Supreme Being, is called Antaratma. And then outside the Jiva are these 5 material coverings. Now, we also discussed how these 5 material coverings get attached to the Jivas. How did that happen? And again, Gita verse, I want to remind you of chapter 14, 5th verse, which gives you a hint. And we discussed this last week. We discussed about Shodasha Kala Purushaha. And we said how the Jiva, which is the 16th entity, has got 15 fences around it. The 17th, which is the Shri Tattva, basically links the Jiva to the material bodies. And then the 18th entity, which is Vishnu, who releases the Jiva from the embodiment of bondage. So this particular verse in Gita, chapter 14, it basically gives you an idea of the Sattvam Rajastam iti gunaha prakrutihi sambhavaha nibadnanti mahabaho dehe dehinam avyayam. So what that means is Sattvam, Rajastvam, Sattva, Rajas, and iti gunaha, these various gunas. So there's matter made of these gunahas. Prakriti sambhavaha. Prakriti means Chetana Prakriti. That is Sri Tattva, Lakshmi. She uses this matter. Nibadnanti. Nibadnanti means ties, bonds, or binds. So Chetana Prakriti binds these 3 gunas to the Jiva. Okay. So, and how does that binding becomes? That becomes the Deha for the body. Deha means body. But Dehinam Avyayam. But Krishna reminds us, but the Dehinam. Dehinam means one who is inside the body, which is the Jiva. He is Avyayam. Avyayam means somebody who has no death, who is imperishable. Yeah. So Avyayam, Dehinam, Avyayam. So 5 koshas. So what are these 5 koshas? We discussed those 5. Now to link it up with the 5 bhutas, so Aap and Prithvi, so these are the grossest form of matter, that is solid state and liquid state. They form the Annamaya kosha for this jiva. Annamaya kosha is the gross body. It is the body that we have at this point of time, and it is made up of what we eat and what we drink. That's what makes the Annamaya kosha. Okay. Then Vayu, Tejas and Akasha makes the Pranamaya kosha. Why do they make the Pranamaya kosha? Let's think about it. Now, even a stone can have a component of a liquid in it and a component of solid in it. Even a stone, which is a jada, can have Aap and Prithvi. Whereas the livingness in that particular matter is a property of living beings. Okay. Why is that the property? Because living beings breathe. They breathe, they do metabolism, they do oxidative phosphorylation, and they make energy using air. Yeah. So in a human being, for example, we take in air, which is Vayu, okay, and we metabolize the oxygen, which is the heat that is produced. And how do we take in the air? We take in the air through our nostrils, through our windpipe, and so on, lungs, which is the space. So this component of air, space, and metabolism is a component of living beings. Okay, so that is what gives the Pranamaya kosha for the jivas. Now, it is not enough just being, breathing and having respiration and having Aap and Prithvi as Annamaya. We need to be aware of our own existence. Yeah. So I need to know that I exist, and I need to know that other things outside me exist. And I also need to be able to discriminate what is me, what is not mine, what is others, and so on. So these concepts, that is the Manas, Buddhi, and Ahankara, then becomes the Manonmaya kosha for the jivas. Then there is another component called Vijnanamaya kosha, which is called Chitta. Chitta is the memory shell, okay, where all the things that we grasp in this life, they all go into the memory shelf in the subconsciousness. So that forms what is called the Vijnanamaya kosha. Most of the knowledge that we grasp is, we actually bring our memory from subconscious state to a conscious state. That is what is called knowledge, really. So that's why it's called Vijnanamaya kosha. So that is the Chitta state. Then the philosophy goes to say there is yet another kosha called Chetana or Anandamaya kosha. And this is the deep memory, as it's called. This could be the memory of not just this birth, but it could be all the imprints that you might have accumulated in several births. Your karma imprints are also in this particular subtle kosha. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring this is, for us, we didn't discuss this much last week because it's important. And the other one is also to show, so these 5 koshas of the jivas, also, as I said, there is nothing in the universe that does not have that is not pervaded by the Supreme Being. So in Taittiriya Upanishad, in Bruhuvalli and Brahmandavalli, there is a lot of discussion in this. But also in the Brahmasutras, Veda Vyasa, the very first Samanvaya Adhikarana that he has written is something called Anandamayo Abhyasa. So Anandamayo Abhyasa basically discusses this in great detail. So I would encourage you to pick that book, Vedantasutra, and read that particular sutra in the first adhyaya. Okay? So now every covering of the body is pervaded by a form of the Supreme. And the philosophy will say the Annamaya kosha is pervaded by these, the 5 koshas are pervaded by the 5 forms of Vishnu: Aniruddha, Pradyumna, Sankarshana, Vasudeva, and Narayana. Okay? So now I'm giving you a comprehensive picture of us as living beings. Our body, the 5 layers of our body is pervaded by the Supreme Being, Aniruddha Pradyumna, by the name Aniruddha Pradyumna Sankarshana Vasudeva and Narayana. And within us as jivas, we are pervaded by the Antaryami. Yeah? The Antara Atma is also pervaded. So this Supreme Guy has pervaded every aspect of our lives and of our existence. So this key Vedic concept, I would strongly urge all of us to somehow engrave this in our minds. This is what we have not done, and that is the reason for all the problems of our lives, as I will illustrate in the subsequent slides. Moving on to the next slide, Abhijit. So now the next question is, and I think this will be of interest to all of us. Where is the soul and where is the super soul? There is a lot of confusion about soul and super soul, and where is it actually in the body? Is the soul in the brain? Is the soul in the heart? By which I mean your heart, right atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. Is it in that, or is it somewhere else? There is confusion here. Okay. So what I want to take here is, none of us have seen the soul. None of us have seen the super soul, because we cannot see this through our material eyes. So we have to use another means of knowledge, and we touched upon this briefly last week. So we will have to go to the Vedas themselves and see what do they say about this. Where is the Jiva and where is the Paramatma in the body? So Prashna Upanishad, the third question in the Prashna Upanishad is the Ashvalayana. He is the guy who asked Pippalada Rishi that question. Where is prana? Where are the various components of pranas? What is nadi? What are all the five prana types, and how do the nadis operate? How do things go? He asks that question. Where is the jiva? How does it operate, and so on? So Ashvalayana asked the same question to Pippalada Rishi in Shatprashna Upanishad, and Pippalada gave the answer there. As I said, Hridi hi esha atma. Okay, Hridi means the heart. Heart, I want to clarify, it does not mean your ventricles and the atrium. Heart is just a place in your body. So when I say I am, I place my hands on my chest, because that is where I am. I am placed there. So Hridihi Esha Atma. So from Prashna Upanishad, we understand that the Jiva is in the region of the heart. Taittiriya Upanishad then talks about where Brahman is, or where the Supreme Being is. Now, this is a very key verse in philosophical discourse. It goes like this: Brahmavid apnoti param tad esha abhyukta satyam jnanam anantam brahma yo veda nihitam guhayam parame vyoman so ashnute sarvan kaman saha brahmana vipasthita iti. Okay. These four lines are they are just wonderful lines for deep philosophical speculation. But for today's purpose, I'm just going to take the third line. Yo Veda Nihitam Guhayam Parame Vyoman. He who knows that the Supreme Being is in that cave. Okay? Guhayam. There is a cave, and in that cave there is a space, and in that space is the Supreme Person. He who knows that will attain liberation, is what this Upanishad is saying about Brahman. So now we also understand that the Supreme Being is also present in the heart. Okay. Now, if both these guys, the Jiva and the Supreme Being, are present in the heart, how are they present? Are they sitting next to each other, or one is inside the other? Katha Upanishad tells you that Anoraniyan Mahato Mahiyan Na Atma Asya Jantor Nihito Guhayam. Okay. Guha, cave, the space. So Anoraniyan Mahato Mahiyan. So this chap, the supreme fellow, is Anoraniyan. He's smaller than the smallest, and he is bigger than the biggest. So Jivas are subatomic. So he is inside the subatomic Jiva. That's Anoraniyan. Okay. So now we understand that Jiva and Brahman are in the region of the heart, and that the Brahman is inside Jiva. Okay. Now, there is another Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad, which is part of the Samaveda. Yeah? And it is also one of the big Upanishads. There is a chapter called Dahara Vidya. Dahara Vidya tells you clearly where exactly these guys are present. So it says, Ata, Yad, Idam, Asmin, Brahmapure, Daharam, Pundarikam. Okay. So Brahmapure, that's a beautiful word. Brahmapure means, Pura means the place. The place where Brahma is, Brahmapure, Daharam Pundarikam. So Pundarika means lotus. Okay. So the Chandogya Upanishad is telling us that there is a lotus in your heart, an inverted lotus in your heart. Dahare asmin antara akashaha tasmin anyad antastaha. Okay. So it says, in that inverted lotus, there is a space. And in that space is this Jivatma and Paramatma sitting. Okay. So now from this we have to infer that Jiva and Brahman are not in your right, left, or the right atrium, left atrium, or the right ventricle or the left ventricle. They are not in that. They are in an organ which is an inverted lotus bud, as described in the Vedas. And the Shastras clearly tell us that that is the thymus gland. That corresponds to the area where the thymus gland is, that there is a subtle space, and in that space, the Jivatman and the Paramatman are placed. Okay. Now, why is that? How can one be so sure of that? To explore that, one needs to go to the Mandukya Upanishad. I think a few weeks ago we discussed Mandukya Upanishad about the 3 states of consciousness of the jivas, and how so the 3 states of consciousness of jivas is wakeful state, the dream sleep, and the dreamless sleep. Yeah. So in the dreamless sleep, the Mandukya Upanishad states that the dreamless sleep, the Jiva and Brahman are in close, they are hugging each other. That is what it describes. And the Mandukya Upanishad also gives us an idea that state is in Anahata Chakra. Yeah. And that Anahata Chakra corresponds to the thymus gland. So that is also another evidence to say where the Jivatman and Paramatman are placed. Okay. So the summary of this is, if one message that you want to take from me from today's class is, where is Jivatman and where is Paramatman? They are both present in this inverted lotus bud, Hridaya Kamala. Okay? That is the thymus gland, where there is a space where the Jiva and the Paramatma is present. Now, I also looked at the Gita and see what is the Gita's view on where the Jiva is placed. So I did a search within the Bhagavad Gita and asked the question, Hridi. The word Hridi, where does it come in the Bhagavad Gita? So the word Hridi, which means the heart, comes in 3 places. There are only 3 verses. Krishna is talking about the place where the heart is, the Hridi. One is, I've just taken 2 here. One is chapter 13, verse 18. Jyotisham api tad jyotihi, okay, param uchyate jnanam nyeyam jnanagamyam hridi sarvasya vishtitam. So in all jivas, in all the hearts, I am placed. That's what Krishna is saying. Then there is also another verse, which is a very important verse, 15th chapter, 15th verse. Sarvasya cha aham hridi sannivishtaha. Okay, in all the jivas, I am in this hridi, in this heart. So now we can confirm, we have taken the Upanishads, we have taken the Gita to now confirm that this Jiva and Brahman are actually placed in the region of the heart, which is inverted lotus bud, which corresponds to the thymus. So yes, fine. So the Jiva is there and the Paramatma is there. The Paramatma has pervaded the Jivatma. So what is the big deal? What is our relation to the Supreme? This is the fundamental question. Now, that cave where the Jivatma and the Paramatma are sitting, Mundaka Upanishad actually takes this up and builds a whole philosophy around it. It goes like this, and many of you would be familiar with these mantras from Mundaka Upanishad. Dva suparana sayuja sakaya samana vriksham parishashvajate tayor anyaha pippalam swadvati anashnan anyaha avichakashiti. That is a summary of how we are placed in this cave. So the Upanishad is saying, in this cave of the heart, there are 2 birds. So they are sitting in that bird. One bird is looking away from the other bird, and it is looking at this tree and it is eating all the fruits from this tree. Although the fruits are very bitter, it somehow thinks that these are the sweetest things that exist in the universe, and it is enjoying that fruit. Okay. Whereas the other bird, Anashnan Anyaha, Avichakashiti. Anashnan, Nashnan means eat, Anashnan means not eat. So the other guy is not eating everything, but he is full of happiness and bliss. His eyes are glowing, and he is just looking at the other guy and he's saying, what a waste of time. What is this guy doing here, eating that fruit? So this is captured in Mundaka Upanishad, which essentially means the Jivatman has looked away from the Paramatman, and it is focused on this tree, which is this body, and it is getting all the fruits from this samsara or the material world in which it is operating, and it is assuming that every fruit that I am getting is the sweetest fruit. But this eternal witness, who is the second bird, is just watching and documenting all this guy is doing. So this is the constitutional position of the Jivatman and Paramatman that we need to firm it up in our mind. The reason being, our relationship, that is the relationship between the Jiva and Paramatman, is something that is a topic for deep contemplation in the Vedic philosophy. Okay? What is the relationship between the Jivatman and the Paramatman? Okay? Now, I just want to take two verses here. One in Rig Veda, the other one in Gita. The Rig Veda says, Rupam Rupam Pratirupo Babhuvaha Tadasya Rupam Pratichakshanaya Indro Mayabhihi Purarupa Iyate Yuktahi Yasya Harayaha Shatadasha. So what it says is, this Rig Veda mantra basically is talking about Indra. There is not your Indra, the Indra's demigod. Indra there is the supreme Indra. Yeah. So that is the supreme being. That is the super soul is the Indra there. So this is saying that for every jiva, there is a form of the Lord that controls that jiva. So rupam prati rupo babhuvaha. So that form of the Lord is called the bimba rupa. He is the object, and the form of the jiva is taken as to be a pratibimba or a reflection. In this example, the mirror is the upadhi or the reflecting medium. Okay, so that is the metaphorical way in which you can understand what is the relationship between jiva and Paramatma is. So in this example, the object is there. If I am tying the tie, the image is also tying the tie. So the image is entirely dependent on the object. If the object combs the hair, then the image will also appear as it's combing the hair. Yeah. So that dependence, the concept of dependence, is highlighted in this verse using this analogy of whatever the object does, then the image also does that. Now, which brings about this concept of dependence. So the jiva's dependence on Brahman for all its activities, for all its affairs in life. Yeah. So that is the meaning there, not to be taken literally, but to be taken metaphorically. Now, this same concept is taken up in chapter 2 of Gita, 18th verse. Antavanta ime dehaha nityasya yukta sharirinaha anashino apremeyasya tasmad yuddhasva bharata. Note, I've underlined anashinaha and aprameyasya. Why have I underlined that? Let's go to the first line. Antavanta ime dehaha. Deha means this body. And Krishna is saying, Antavanta ime dehaha. These bodies are perishable. Okay. But he says, Nityasya yuktaha sharirinaha. Okay. Nityasya yuktaha means, Nitya means deathless. Okay. Who? Sharirinaha. Who is the sharirinaha? Sharira is the body. Sharirinaha is the one who is inside this body. Who is inside this body? The jiva who is inside the body. So that picks up a key philosophical question is, why are jivas eternal? Why are jivas deathless? Why do they not have an origin? Krishna answers this in the second verse. He uses a word called anashinaha and aprameyasya. If you think about that a bit more, if you go back to this figure, I told you about the pratibimba or the reflection, and I told about the bimba, and I told about the reflection. Now, I also told you that the reflection is equivalent to a jiva. So in this example, what are the situations where the reflections may not be seen? The reflection may not be seen if the mirror is broken and the mirror does not exist, or if the object moves away from the mirror, the reflection cannot be seen. So those are the two conditions. But in this relationship between Jiva and Brahman, the contact between the object and the mirror can never not be there, because God is all pervasive. He is everywhere. So that is the meaning of the word aprameyasya. He is everywhere. So if he is everywhere, there will never be a point where the God's reflection cannot be on this mirror. So That is not possible. And the second one is the mirror itself. Can the mirror itself break down? No, because the philosophy there is the Jiva himself is the reflection. So the Jiva, who is eternal, is himself the reflection. God is everywhere. So the controlling power of God on Jiva is always there forever. So, and that is the reason why Jivas are also considered as eternal in Vedic philosophy, because they are eternally dependent on the eternal supreme. Okay, and so that gives you an idea of our fundamental constitutional position is we are completely dependent on the supreme. Okay, for every action that we make. Now, this concept further, moving on to the next slide. So this concept is then also taken up in another very, very famous Upanishad. It's called Keno Upanishad. Keno Upanishad is also called Talavakara Upanishad. And this comes also in it's also in Samaveda. So Samaveda has got two main Upanishads. One is Chandogya and the other one is Talavakara Keno Upanishad. Now, Keno Upanishad is a dialogue. It's a discussion between Chaturmukha Brahma on the left and Shiva on the right. Okay, so basically in this Upanishad, Shiva is asking a question to Chaturmukha. Okay, and I'll read the very first verse and we'll have a discussion on that. Shiva is asking this question to Chaturmukha Brahma. Kene shitam patati preshitam manaha, kena pranaha pratamaha preiti yuktaha, kene shitam vacham imam vadanti, chakshuhu shrotram kavudevo yunakti. He's asking, Shiva is asking this question to Chaturmukha. Chaturmukha is instantly giving him an answer. Shrotrasya shrotram, manasa mano, yad vachaha vacham, savu pranasya pranaha, chakshushas chakshuhu atimuchya dhiraha, pretya asmad lokad amruta bhavanti. Okay, two fundamental verses from Keno Upanishad. But the first verse is asking you, it is also meant for us. It is asking us this basic question. So Shiva is asking the question on her before. He says, Kene shitam patati preshitam manaha. How does the mind operate? How does the mind work? Kena pranaha pratamaha preiti yuktaha. How does the breathing happens? How does the respiration happens? Kene shitam vacham imam vadanti. How am I speaking? Somehow something happening in my brain, the nerves impulse coming to my vocal cord, and some vibrations happen, and then there are words that are coming out of my mouth. Chakshu shrotram kavudevo yunakti. How am I seeing? What am I seeing? How am I hearing? Why is he asking that question? Can anybody here claim that we are responsible for creating any of these components that we use in our life? Starting from our pralaya situation, we were in suspended animation as jivas. Then we have come into this universe in manifestation. Then God has put us and given us this body. Now in that body, there are all these various sense organs that we are using. Okay, the sense organs are basically what is described here, and also the prana. So we are using all this. Have we created it? Are we responsible for making all this? Have we decided in whose parents we are going to be born? Have we decided when and how we are going to perish and go out of this world? We have actually not made anything. We have a body, we are using it. We have eyes, we are using it as an instrument to see stuff. We have a tongue and we have a vocal cord, we are using it. So none of it is what we have created. So Shiva is asking this question to Chaturmukha Brahma. So who created all this? Who made all this? I have not made any of those things. Chaturmukha says, you know what? Shrotrasya shrotram manasa mano. So who is sitting inside this? Who is this Antaryami who is sitting inside every component of this universe? That Antaryami is responsible for everything. So again, it brings out this concept of total dependence, our total dependence and utter helplessness with regards to how we conduct our affairs in this universe. But despite that, do we actually think about this in our day-to-day mundane lives? No, we don't. There is another verse in Chandogya Upanishad which captures this. We don't have time to go into that, but I would urge you to go to Chandogya Upanishad, 6th Adhyaya. It is a discussion between Uddalaka Aruni and his son Shvetaketu with 9 examples describing the state of affairs of us as jivas and our relationship with the Supreme Being. And that again illustrates the total dependence and utter helplessness of the jivas. In Bhagavatam, in Srimad Bhagavatam, again, this is captured with a very key verse. Some of you may be very familiar with this. Dravyam karmashta kalashta swabhavo jiva yevacha yad anugrahataha santi nasanti yadupekshaya. So what it means essentially is there is every component of this universe has got the Supreme Being who is controlling it. Dravyam means things. Karma, kala, swabhava, jiva, they are all dependent on the Supreme Being. If he was not there, he was not making it happen, none of it would actually exist. Unfortunately, we don't run our mundane lives with this. So going back to moving on to the next slide, Abhijit. So we are not thinking about this in our current life. So that is what the Mundaka Upanishad is saying. Now these 2 birds are sitting. This guy is looking away from the eternal witness. And what has happened to the other bird? Samane vrikshepnaha anishaya shochati muhyamanaha. So the other bird, eventually it is getting a bit fed up. It is eating all these bitter fruits, but still it is not finding its happiness because it is not in control of its daily affairs of its life. How many of us are actually in control of anything? We realize current time is the best time to realize that none of us are actually in control of anything that happens in our lives. Anishayaha. Isha means that which controls. Anisha means that which cannot control. Anishaya. Shochati. Shochati means shokam, means it suffers. Yeah. Muhyamanaha. Completely confused and it just does not know where to go. So that is our situation as described in the Mundaka Upanishad. And again, the chapter 6 Chandogya Upanishad, it takes this as a couple of examples. I will just take one because it's a very beautiful verse. It's the Uddalaka Aruni is telling his son, why does this bird does not realize that its source is from the eternal witness? Why does it not do that? Is it so stupid that it can't do that? So the Uddalaka Aruni gives a metaphorical example. He says, Yata somya madhu madhukruto nishtistanti nanat yayanat vrikshanam rasanam samavaharam ekatam rasam gamayanti te tata yatra na vivekam labante amushyaham vrikshasya raso asmi iti evameva kalu somya imaha sarvaha prajaha sati sampadhyana viduhu sati sampadhyamaha iti. So this is a beautiful verse. Basically, what it is talking about, it is giving an example of a bumblebee, of all these bumblebees that go to various flowers and then finally go to the beehive and they deposit all their honey. And this drops of nectar that each bumblebee actually puts it into that hive and it creates a honey. Honey is a composite of all the individual droplets. And then but does the individual droplet of the honey actually know that I have come from this flower? I have come from this flower? They do not know that. Because they do not know that, what is happening is, he have Yagrova, Simhova, Vrukova, Varahova, Kitova, Patangova, Damshova, Mashakova, Yad Bhavanti, Tada Bhavanti. Because we do not know that we have come from the Supreme, because we do not know that that guy controls all our activities, because we have assumed our independence, that we have assumed that we are in control of everything, because we have taken our independence, because we have assumed that we are in control of everything, we are doing things that satisfy our own selfish needs, and in the process, we accumulate karmas. We get those karmic imprints in our subtle body, and those karmic imprints then dictate the kind of life that we are going to have in the next life and so on. So the Upanishad basically says that is the reason why the souls go through form of tiger, lion, boar, mosquito, and flies and so on. So this is a beautiful description in Chandogya Upanishad. I would urge you to check this out. Now, we have forgotten, right? So we have forgotten, moving on to the next slide, Abhijit. So we have forgotten our dependence and our relationship with the Supreme. So we have got ignorance. We have forgotten that ignorance is there. Now, this is a core concept in Vedic philosophy. How did that ignorance come about? Is that ignorance real? If that ignorance is real, who put that ignorance onto jivas? What is this ignorance? These are deep philosophical questions that are addressed in various Upanishads. But I just want to remind you, in about 3 classes before, we discussed the Srimad Bhagavatam and we discussed about the 9 stages of creation. The 6th stage of creation is important. The 6th stage of creation in Srimad Bhagavatam shares, Shashtastu tamasaha sargaha. Yeah. Yastu abuddhi krutoho praboho. Abuddhi krutaha praboho. So what that means is, in the 6th stage of the creation, ignorance was created. Tamasaha sarge. And we discussed sarga means creation. Tamasaha sarga, that ignorance was created by praboho. The Supreme Being himself creates ignorance. So this is the fascinating problem of us. Why should somebody create ignorance for us? Similarly, in Mandukya Upanishad, there is another key phrase, Anadi Mayaya Shuptaha. Okay? The Mayaya there, we discussed last time, there are various meanings of Mayaya. One meaning is ignorance. Yeah? Anadi Mayaya Shuptaha Yada Jivaha Prabudhyate. Okay? So this God has put ignorance on the jivas so that they forget their relationship with the Supreme. Okay? The same thing is also captured in Skanda Puran, where it talks about Utpatti Sthiti Samhara Niyatir Jnanam Avrittihi. Avritti means ignorance. Okay? In the eightfold dispensation of the universe, the Supreme Being himself puts that ajnana. In Gita 15.5, we just saw that a few minutes ago. Sarvasya cha aham hrudi sannivishtaha mattaha smrutir jnanam apohanam cha. So I am in the heart of the jivas. I am responsible to give them memory. I am responsible to give them knowledge. I am also responsible to give them apohanam. Apohanam means ignorance. Okay? So it is the Lord who puts the ignorance on souls. That is a test for us. We could discuss that a bit more in the next session perhaps, but I just wanted to introduce this concept of ignorance here. So now moving on to the next slide, we're coming to the tail end of this. So now, because of the ignorance, okay, samane vrikshe purusho nimagnaha anishaya shochati muhyamanaha. So that is why it has gone into this suffering mode. Now, how do we have to get out of this suffering mode? That fixed it first. So maybe we'll do another 2 minutes and finish this set off. So how do we get over? How do we now find our journey? So we are here, we got our body, we have ignorance, we have assumed that we are independent. Now we are accumulating karmas. So how do we make this journey? How do we get out of this quagmire? How do we get out of this cage? Okay. Now, Katha Upanishad gives you an excellent metaphor for us to think about this in every day of our lives. It goes like this. It compares the body and its various components to a chariot. It says, Atmanam Ratinam Viddhi, Shariram Ratamevacha, Buddhim tu Saratim Viddhi, Manaha Pragraham Yevacha, Indriyani Hayanahu, Vishayan Teshu Gocharan, Atma Indriya Mano Yuktam Bhokte Ahur Manishina. So basically what it says is, if you take a chariot, present day it could be a car. If you take a chariot, the 5 horses of the chariot are the sense organs. The mind is the rein that can control the senses. The intellect or the buddhi will give you the discrimination and will direct the mind to follow a particular path. And then the jiva is the passenger who's sitting there, who is going towards a destination. So in this example, the prabhava is the genetic and the environmental forces. Swabhava is the inherent quality of the jivas that dictates what their destination is going to be. If, for example, if we decide we are going to spend our lives moving towards sense objects, getting transient temporary pleasures, and in the process we suffer, that is called as prayers in Katha Upanishad. If we go towards the path of prayers, then we are stuck in the samsara, constant cycles. When we do that, we incur karmas, and when we incur karmas, that dictates further lives. So this is what the next slide is basically telling us. So this is our journey now. So our journey is this. So we as a soul, we are the soul, but we have two coverings. We have the subtle body and we have the gross body. When we die, we give up this gross body, but based on the karmic imprints in our subtle body, we accept another body. And we keep going and going in eternal cycles. In fact, the Shastras tell us, after 14th year of life, all the activities that you do will result in at least 10 future births. So imagine the number of future births that we have all accumulated in our various life points. We need to start somewhere to try and break this cycle. And how are we going to break this cycle? We will break this cycle when we have our own individual realization. So moving on to the next slide, there is a very, very foundational starting point for all of us, summarized by Jayatirtha in the 30th century. So Jayatirtha was a great Dvait philosopher. So he said, Ihahi vivida samsarika dukkha darshanena viraktasya shama damadi mataha mumukshoho adhikarinaha. That is the first line and a few words in the second line. So what it means is, who is a mumukshu? Mumukshu is a technical term for somebody who realizes, shit, what is going on in my life? I'm constantly going through this cycle. How do I get over this cycle? He who thinks about this is a mumukshu. Okay? And who becomes a mumukshu? First line, Ihahi vivida samsarika dukkha darshanena viraktasya. That person who, having gone through cycles of birth and death, at some point will realize that this is full of suffering, life is full of suffering, that I need to move on and I need to find the direction towards the eternal truth and get away from the sufferings of samsara. That is the starting point. And this starting point comes to different people in different births, and even in a single birth in different stages in their births. Buddha had it, Siddhartha had it, many Vedic philosophers have had this. So that is dukkha darshana, seeing the suffering and that you want to get out of this. That is the starting point. And once you start that inquiry, then you take a U-turn. Previously, your chariot was going towards the prayers. It was going through the sense objects. Now, once you realize that, once you become a mumukshu, you will be taking a U-turn and you will be going towards Shreyas. What is that Shreyas? Then you start asking the key questions. Who am I? Where am I? Why am I in this body? Who is controlling me? What is inside me? What are these various components of this body? What are the purusharthas and so on? And eventually you find your destination. What is that destination going to be? Moving on to the next slide, Abhijit. Following that. Yeah, next one. So this is our next slide, Abhijit. So yeah, that's the one. No, the destination slide. Yeah, so that's the one. Thank you. So the destination slide. So now the same Mundaka Upanishad says, Jushtam yada pashyati anyamisham asya mahimanam iti vita shokaha. So this bird, which has been suffering because it does not know what to do, it is eating this bitter fruit, still is not happy, it is not satisfied, and so on. That bird will find happiness only when it decides that instead of turning towards the material world, it actually makes that U-turn and starts looking at that eternal witness. And he starts making that inquiry into that eternal witness. That is when there is a hope for this bird to be released. So it says, Yada pashyaha pashyate rukmavaranam kartaramisham purusham brahmayonim tada vidwan punyapapena viduya niranjanaha paramam samyam upaiti. So that is the starting point when it says once you start making the U-turn and start looking inwards into the Supreme Being, understanding Him, then everything else in your life will fall in place. You will start doing Nishkama karma. Your karmic imprints will start coming down. You will reduce the number of births that you're going to take. You might even be able to eliminate karma. You might be able to do so many things when you start getting the divine grace. Yeah. So what our primary goal here should be that we reduce our karmic imprints and try and reduce the number of births that we are going to take. So you might reach a stage where your subtle body, which is the very first covering of the jiva, here I put a number of stars inside it. Each star represents a karmic imprints. When you start focusing your life towards Shreyas, you will start reducing that karmic imprints. And you will reach a situation where your Linga Sharira will have no karmic imprints. That stage will happen. When that happens, that is when you stop having rebirths. Yeah. And when that happens, Shastras are very clear. Vedas and Upanishads are very clear that you will go to Brahmaloka, you will be with Chaturmukha Brahma, you will be waiting for the final dissolution of the universe. Mundaka Upanishad, for example, tells us, Te Brahmalokeshu Parantakale Param Amruta Parim Uchayanti Sarve. You wait until the Parantakala is, that is the final dissolution of the universe. And again, 3 weeks ago, we discussed about the current age of Chaturmukha Brahma. He has finished 50 years and he is on the first day. And this is the 25th Divya Yuga that is going on. So there is at least another 50 years to go. So in calculation, you're looking at 3.1 times 10 to the power of 13 years before we would actually go back to liberation. So I'm sorry to burst the bubble here for those who might think that they have a chance of going into Vaikuntha in this birth. You may go to Vaikuntha, but you will have to wait because you will have to go along with Chaturmukha Brahma, and Chaturmukha Brahma has to finish his age span. Okay, so that is the grand global vision of Vedic philosophy. Yeah. Now we'll skip what is the liberation state, but that is for an entirely different philosophical discussion. But I hope this gives you an idea as to what is the Vedic view of the grand scheme of things. Now it all boils down, if we decide that we want emancipation and liberation, it is very important that we have some fundamental understandings of what the Vedas are telling us, what is the process, or what is the procedure. So once we get the hang of it, then whatever else that we do next to try and reduce the karma in our lives will fit in very well. This could be Sankirtan, it could be, you might be doing classes every day, you might be doing satsang, you might be doing your readings, you might be practicing Nishkama karma. You will then combine karma and jnana together, and then finally you go to bhakti. So bhakti is the key. Bhakti yoga is the culmination of karma and knowledge. So it is intertwined. So you cannot have bhakti on its own. You cannot do karma and not do jnana on its own. These three needs to be intertwined together until divine grace that finally leads to liberation. So that is top question at a later stage. Hope I will have given you some insight and background with regards to what is the class.
Was Madhu,
we cannot hear you.
we're not able to hear you for the first 3 minutes, Bas.
Ignorance, web of karma lead to eternal cycles of birth and death. But in Advaita, Visishta Advaita, and Dvaita, there are some subtle differences. I want to point this out because then you can do your individual studies. In Advaita, for example, jivas do not exist. Whereas in Vishishta Advaita and Dvaita, jivas are real and they're atomic and they exist. In Advaita, samsara does not exist really. Whereas the other two schools of Vedantas accept that samsara exists. In Advaita, the ignorance is not to the jiva. The ignorance is superimposed on Brahman. Whereas for Vishishta Advaita and Advaita, the ignorance is real, but it is on the jivas, not on Brahman. Okay. And in Advaita, knowledge is sufficient to eliminate ignorance and hence samsara. But for Vishishta Advaita and Dvaita, knowledge along with bhakti and divine grace is absolutely essential for removal. So these are some subtle differences within the schools of Vedanta. But if you look at Buddhism, for example, they do not accept jivas at all. Jivas do not exist in Buddhism. God does not exist in Buddhism. So there is no question of moksha and so on. In Jainism, for example, jivas are infinite and they change size depending on body. But there isn't a liberation, there isn't a Vaikuntha for them. The liberation for jivas in Jainism is an eternal journey. So they are just flying infinitely forever. So there is no destination, but they're flying infinitely in the universe. That is their moksha. In Nyaya Vaisheshika schools, jivas are infinite, but they are all pervasive. In Shankara, there is only one pervasive being. Somehow it has become individual souls. For Ramanuja and Madhva, souls are atomic. And they have to find their salvation and their journey. So these are some varying views. So maybe with these discussions that we've had today evening, you might be able to do your own explanation and your own research, and you might be able to find the philosophy that appeals to you the most. And that probably is dependent on your own swabhava, but I'll leave it for you to decide. So with that, I'll stop. Krishna Pramastu, and thank you for listening.
Oh, thanks, Mother.
Thank you,
Once
sir.
again, wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Anybody has got questions, please? You can put it now.
Madhu?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, this is Janardhan. I have.
Oh, hello. Hi. How are you?
I'm fine, sir. I have got two questions. One, in the Brihadaranya Upanishad, you told about the debate between Yajnavalika and Gargi.
No, the debate that I was, so yes, correct. So Gargi was one part of the debate. So basically you had Uddalaka Aruni, you had Gargi, you had Ushasva, you had Kahola, you had Shaukalya, many others.
Arabaga and Bujyu, Ushasta, Uddalaka, all those people are asking. And when Gargi, lastly Gargi comes, am I right?
Yeah.
And Gargi also puts the final question about the Brahman. She goes step by step. Lastly, it comes to the final, where out in the ether, he says, what is the world of Indra? And he answers, it's Virij, O Gargi. Then she is asking, what is the world of Virji pervaded? He says Hiranyagarbha. And what is the word of, in the world of Hiranyagarbha pervaded? For which, is he giving the answer as Brahman, or he says no, it cannot go beyond it? Is there any clear answer, sir?
Yes, definitely. So as for today's discussion, we were just focused on that conversation between Uddalaka Aruni and Yajnavalkya. So that was the discussion around the Antaryami. So what I'll do is, Janardhan, sir, if it is okay, why don't we maybe in the next week, I can bring up the Gargi discussion, and then maybe if Sudarshan permits, for 5 minutes we can have a discussion around this, because there are various interpretations of this from the Vedic schools. So you may have to take that into account. If that's all right with you, then we can leave it for next week. Perfectly good.
And and the second question is about Anahatam, right? You said you just mentioned the Jiva and Brahman. It's an inverted lotus, and Jiva and Brahman stays there in Anahata, which is in the heart. The chakras, in Tamil also, there is in Kundalini Yoga, the chakras are mentioned. Mooladhara, Swadhisthana, Manipurakam, Anahatam, and Ajna. Here also Anahatam is mentioned. in Arahata, what it says, Arahatam is it's in the shape of triangle. It's the color of crimson red or Agni, and where Rudra and Parvati stays. And it's also in the letter for it also consists the letter of C. In Namasivaya, it comes the letter of C. Which is there any correlation, or the interpretations of both the two different systems are different?
Excuse me,
So
Jana sirs. Madhu sir, this is Sumati here from Stafford.
Yes,
Yes, Jana sir, you had spoken my query as well. Just to echo, yeah, we look at the chakra, and that is the fourth chakra in the heart.
Yeah.
And it's located in the center of the chest, and that is denoted as in green.
Yes.
It represents love, relationship, personal development, direction, and sharing. I'm wondering if the Veda and Upanishads had influenced this chakra evolution.
Yeah. So I think both questions, if you could answer them simultaneously. So all the various chakras and the various yoga systems and everything gets inspiration from the Vedic philosophy, the Vedic views. Yeah, number one. So they all get their inspiration and the background information from the Vedas.
Okay.
The second point there is, so you, I think you are there are similarities between both schools. So I think you are clearly coming from a Shiva Agama perspective.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I'm coming from Savanyara Bodham. I'm mentioning
so you are
this
coming
from
from
Savanyara Bodham.
So your background, your evidence base comes from Shiva Agamas. Am I right with that? That's my understanding of that.
Yes, sir.
So
you are right, sir.
Yeah. So you are coming from Shiva Agamas. Now, where I am coming from is from the Apaurushaya Vedas.
Okay.
So there are some differences there because it is a controversial topic, probably not meant for this forum.
Okay.
But it boils down to, where do the Shiva Agamas get their authority from? I do not know the answer. I'll probably leave it for you to answer. Where do the authorities come from, Shiva Agamas? So the authorities is what Pashupati has written in his 16 or so Agamas, and the various chakras come from that. And also within the Shaivist school, there are various strands. There are Advaita strands within the Shaiva school, and there are Dvaita strands within the Shaiva schools as well. So there are some internal differences within the Shaiva schools. But all that I have focused on and described is only based on Vedas. They are not based on Shiva. Yeah? Because for example, for the core Advaita, Vishishta Advaita and Dvaita schools, their Agamas are the Sadagamas. So Sadagamas, as is defined as the Sad Agamas, that is our scriptural authority for how we believe is the existence and creation is, comes from the four Vedas, the Veda Angas, Itihasa, Purana, Pancharatra Agamas. So these all form the evidence base. So in this evidence base, Shiva Agamas are not a component of this, because what we would accept is anything that correlates and agrees with the Vedas, Itihasa and Purana is called as Agama. Okay, so that is how we are approaching this problem. But I fully get it. The Shaivist school, the Shiva Agamas are also approaching this from another angle. But there is something much more fundamental here, is called a Samanvaya. Samanvaya means the Rudra that you are talking about, or the Vishnu I am talking about, they're actually one and the same entity. So that is called Sarva Shabda Samanvaya. So we are still talking about this Brahman. Who is this Brahman? And as we discussed before, the Brahman is somebody who is that all-pervasive force, who has infinite forms and infinite qualities and infinite names. So for us, for whatever I've spoken so far, that is the key position, is that he has infinite names and he has infinite forms. Okay? So this person's name is also Rudra, this person's name is Shiva, this person's name is Chaturmukha, this person's name is Vishnu. They all form the same person that we want to try and understand. So that is how I've approached this. But whatever I've said today, I have not taken material from Shiva Agamas.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I got a question from Shankari. You put a question, isn't it? Can you ask it openly?
This is Sridhar. Shankari.
Oh, hi, Sridhar. Hi.
Hi, Madhu. My question is, I'll go to the second question. In what way soul is related to consciousness? Does soul have consciousness, or does the coverings of the souls have consciousness? And what does Upanishads and Gita say about it? Please?
Okay, so the Upanishads and the Gita's view is soul, consciousness is the symptom of the soul.
Okay.
Yeah. So if something has consciousness, then that means it's got soul. Consciousness is not a cocktail of the chemical reactions of the brain.
Okay. So when, sorry.
Go on, Sridhar.
So when the soul leaves the body and then it goes on to the next cycle, does it mean that the consciousness is something that's carried within the soul, or it manifests itself when it goes into another body?
Okay, so so we discussed about the 5 coverings, right? The Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manonmaya, Vijnanamaya, and Anandamaya koshas. So these are material coverings of the soul.
Yeah.
And deep inside is the consciousness, that is the Sat, Chit, and Ananda.
Mm-hmm.
That is the essential constituents of the soul. And that size of the soul is subatomic, but it has got a limited amount of Sat, Chit, and Ananda.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got these 5 coverings. So when the body dies, when we die, first thing that goes is the Annamaya kosha. Your body is burned, finished. So the solid and liquid is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And then you stop breathing and you're not metabolizing. So your Pranamaya kosha is gone. So Annamaya and Pranamaya kosha is gone.
Yeah.
That is the first stage of dying. So when we leave this body, when it is burned, these 2 koshas are gone. But the jiva departs from the body. So when the jiva departs from the body, it is still carrying these subtle coverings. The material coverings of the soul is always there. The only situation where the material covering is lost is in liberation. In all other states, even during pralaya, the soul always has a material covering. So now coming back to this, once the body is dead, the jiva has left the body. That jiva initially carries with it the 3 koshas, the Manonmaya, Vijnanamaya, and Anandamaya kosha. Now the Vedic view is when this soul eventually gets into another body. Yeah. So what happens is, at that point when it enters, the Manonmaya kosha that it was carrying from previous birth is lost. Whereas the Vijnanamaya and Anandamaya kosha stays with it. And it acquires the new Manonmaya kosha, Pranamaya kosha, Annamaya kosha of the new body and carries on with its interaction with the external world. Now, why is this interesting and important is that Vijnanamaya and Anandamaya kosha coverings are the coverings of deep memory. So this is deep memory of previous births and so on. Now, this is taken as evidence for people, and there are lots of reports and studies of people who can actually remember their previous births. And there are lots of reports about people saying, look, I was here, I was there, and you might have read a lot of books and articles around that. And they are able to remember this previous births is because of the deep memory that is there in the Vijnana and Anandamaya kosha, particularly in the Anandamaya kosha where it is there. So these 2 coverings are always there with the body. And it is these 2 coverings that actually dictate their karma also, which body they go and the states. So the jiva's consciousness is always there.
Okay.
Did I answer that question, Sridhar?
Yeah, you have answered, and you also answered my previous one about karma. So there is some kind of imprint that the soul carries with it. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Very interesting.
I think, Madhu, that is very useful actually, because there's a lot of studies, from the psychological medicine people who has demonstrated the evidence of past birth and things like that. Of course, the science will take a long time to accept that. But this issue is like, because this definitely, because everybody, generally we try to see everything very physical, We assume that like when the body is dead, what part of it, how is it going to carry to the next stage? And because here we have some sort of evidence for people talking about the past birth, and the memories which has been confirmed, but how is it possible physically? So that sort of our sort of theory and philosophy is able to explain that, and it makes sense as well. Like, of course, many people may still not be able to accept this, but that is fine. But at least like sort of, and there is a continuity. And I think that has gone into the culture, and that's when people say, like, isn't it? I'd rather have this birth next time, or I want to be born in this one, like that, where they express their aspirations. I hope their aspirations will be filled, based on their sort of how much amount of conviction they have in those aspirations, actually. Anybody else has got questions?
Yeah, Madhu.
Yeah.
Janardhan.
Yeah, hi. Yeah.
And this Manomaya, Vijnanamaya and Anandamaya kosa, when it carries to the next birth, how many births it carries like that? Is there any recorded history?
Sir, infinite births. So probably we have already done infinite births, and if we're all going to carry on like this, we'll have infinite births. There is no limit. So number one, there are infinite jivas, and jivas are going through endless cycles of birth and rebirth, unless at some point they decide that they want to cut this. Karma is anadi, but it is not nitya. So the karma that you are having is always there with you, but you can destroy it. So karma is not nitya, but it's anadi. But you can break that cycle, but probably we have made infinite life cycles already. So now, Sudarshan, one thing I wanted to add in your previous birth explanation is near-death experience. There are a lot of studies actually talking about near-death experience.
Yes.
These are formal studies of near-death experience of
There's a
people
book
going through
also
cardiopulmonary arrest, and they're actually stopped breathing for several minutes. And many of these guys, once they come back to life, they're actually describing that they've been sitting outside the body and seeing what's been going on through their Swarupa Indriya. So that concept and that evidence is also there. Yeah, there is a famous example of this person who got blind at the age of 5 years. And then when she was 50 or so, she has a cardiac arrest. She has been blind for 45 years. And she has a cardiac arrest. And then from near-death experience, she comes back to life. So this blind person was then able to describe the whole sequence of events that happened for 30 minutes or so of cardiopulmonary resuscitation. So there is lots of near-death experience also that tells us that the jivas, when they leave the body, they carry with them subtle material coverings with them.
Boss, Madhu, can you put some evidence next time about this for the blind lady who, if you can put the evidence?
Yeah. There is
And I have a question from Krishna, my son. If he's asking if jiva is described as subatomic and words such as depart are used to describe its actions, is the jiva ultimately material or immaterial? Those words subatomic and departed would imply a material physical existence surely.
Okay, so yeah, it's a very good question, Krishna. Thank you very much. So the answer to that is, when I say subatomic, what I mean is that it is subtle. So I'm just using a term to describe a jiva which is extremely subtle and it's extremely small. You just need, in the mundane world, you need to give some kind of a description to it. That is number one. Number two, jivas are not material. By definition, they are non-material. They are non-material, finite quanta of consciousness. The Sat, Chit and Ananda, they are finite quara. I think in psychology it's called quara, is it? You and Sridhar may know this. It's called the finite quara of consciousness, quanta. So they are non-material.
Madhu, Sushruth here. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Hello. Can I ask a question, please?
Yeah. So shall we go to Sushruth first and come to Hardik next, please?
Okay. So we know that there are 3 different types of jivas, isn't it? The Rajas, Tamas and Sat. But essentially, if the Brahman is controlling all of them, why do some jivas perform what we would call bad actions and some perform good actions? If the Brahman is controlling, and he is perfect, then why does he allow imperfect actions?
Okay, that's a beautiful question, Shushot. It hits at the core of this problem of karma and the actions of jiva. So this is called jiva kartrutva. So this is called jiva kartrutva vada, which is an entirely different ball game about jivas. Now, what we may have to realize here is there are different views of jivas and what their intrinsic nature is. Okay. So, first view, if you take the Advaita view, jivas themselves as real entities do not exist. This is the answer from Advaita to account for disparities in the world. Why is somebody rich? Why is somebody poor? Why is somebody suffering? Why is somebody not suffering? Why is somebody beautiful? Somebody is ugly, somebody is tall, somebody is short, somebody is dark, somebody is fair, etc. The varieties of life and all the sufferings that brings along. So you can in one clean sweep, you can address that question saying that, guys, this is not absolutely real. This is all a superimposition. So that is one view. The Buddhist view is very similar to that. Everything is temporary, everything is illusion. So that is one view on that. The other view on that is, if you accept jivas are real, the jivas are tiny fragments and that they have their own destinations, if you accept that, then the question there that arises is, do all jivas have the same qualities in them, or there are different varieties of jivas? Okay? That is an entirely different ball game of philosophical discussion. Some schools will say each jiva is different from the other jiva. Some schools will say there is no entity in the universe that is similar or the same as the other one. No leaf of a tree is the same as the other leaf in the same tree. They are all different. So similarly, every jiva is different. If jivas are uncreated, their qualities are also uncreated, then each jiva has got a destination. So this takes you to what is called as the predestination of souls. Predestination of souls is a very Catholic philosophy. Catholicism, Christianity, for example, there is a concept of eternal damnation. So when there is a judgment day, you either go to heaven or you go to hell. So there is a predestination of souls that is in Judeo-Christian views, and also there are that traits of philosophy in Vedanta. Dvaita Vedanta, for example, will take that view, and it will say there are three types of jivas. There are some called Mukti Yogyas, some called Nitya Samsarins, and some called Tamo Yogyas. So that is the Dvaita view. Then you have the middle ground. The middle ground is the Visishta Dvaita view. The Visishta Dvaita view would say, look, there are souls, they are atomic, they are real, they are Satchidananda, their final destination is the Supreme, and in Supreme they have Samanya. Samanya means their experience of eternal bliss will be on par with the Supreme Being. So that is the Visishta Dvaita view. And yet there are other views. There are Abheda, Bheda, Abheda, Achintya, the ISKCON view, the views from the Gaudiya traditions of Vaishnavism is that every soul is eligible to go back to moksha. Every soul, including Duryodhana, is eligible to go back to moksha. So there are varying views of this, and that is what makes the Vedantic philosophy very fertile to exchange ideas and thoughts. And it's up to individual self as to what they feel is most appealing. The key question is, using these various different views, how do you account for the differences in the world that you see? How do you account for suffering? How do you account for inequality in the world? That is the key question, and that needs to be addressed. Some philosophies have addressed this adequately and some have not. That's another discussion. Sorry, Shishruth, I went on for a bit longer.
No, it's fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Parekh.
Yes.
You know, we had a lady, Dr. Parekh, you know, Meena Parekh, she was asking a question.
Can I ask a question?
Please,
yeah, please.
Well, Deval, hi.
Deval here. So what we talked about, I mean, there's this slide about the various births. So once you achieve a human birth, do you get demoted?
If the rate in which we are all going at this point, if we don't make a change, we might just become an ant, or we may not even come back to any living bodies. We might just be hanging around in the atmosphere. So there is a very good chance that in the human form of life, if we do not do our sadhanas properly, there is a high risk that we might be demoted very quickly.
So the Vedic journey does talk about, I mean, it sounds to me like a little bit of maths. If you've got a lot of positive karma, you get a higher birth. Is it that simplistic?
That component is there, but the key message there is the consciousness with which the jiva leaves the last body is the consciousness that it acquires in its next birth. So that is the fundamental principle. At the time of death, what is the state of your consciousness? You would acquire that as your next birth. Okay. Now, how many of us at the point of death are we going to contemplate the supreme and we are going to say, I need to come to you, I need to attain liberation, and I'm going to come to Vaikuntha, for example? How many of us will do that? The Shastras tell that even if you spend your lifetime practicing that, at the time of death you will talk about or you will think about the supreme, you may still not achieve that level of discipline that requires several births to achieve that discipline, where the conscious state in which you leave this body will decide where you go next. So that's the key point. To reach that point, you need to do all these sadhanas. And of course, the key, as I said, is you need to remove the karmic imprints. The imprints need to be erased. You need to have a clean slate. Without that, there is no hope. One of the beautiful views of Vedanta is karma. If you have an imprint of karma, even God will not remove it. You have to go through your karma. Okay, you have to do your own sadhanas and remove the karmas that you have. God will give you the facilities to make sure that you remove your karma, but He is not going to remove this for you. So that is where the sadhanas come in. There is no concept of forgiveness and say, okay, I've created a sin, I'll forgive, I'll go for some kind of a confession, and I am now removed of my sin. Unfortunately, it does not work that way in Vedic philosophy.
No, but then does the ant have consciousness at the time of death to become a monkey?
I don't know, but the Shastras say that if, for example, because of whatever, maybe I stepped on an ant and killed an ant at some point, either in this birth or in the previous birth, I might have done that. And because of that, I might have had a karmic imprint that I have to be born as an ant. But at the same time, I might have also accumulated good positive karmic imprints from all the previous life. So once I've exhausted that karma of to be an ant, I might still come back as a higher person because my consciousness will direct me that way. Yeah, so it's. I agree. It's not straightforward. It's not a linear relationship, but it happens at various levels.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Madhu, I think we have somebody from Los Angeles who has joined the meeting today. Sumati's friend. Manju is still there?
Cool.
Sumati? Okay, I think she has left. Okay, Sumati, I can see you there. Sumati. Okay, anybody else has got any other questions?
Sudarshan. I am Manju, sorry.
Oh, you're Manju from Los Angeles.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, okay, well, welcome, Ji. Like, I think you're Sumati's friend. She's texted me, say that you joined it today.
Yes,
and welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Do come every week. And, anybody else has got any other questions?
Sudarshan, Rajesh.
Yeah, go on, Rajesh.
Just, I don't know if it's relevant to this forum, but just one curious question on the timers, analogy. So does it speak about the involution of the thymus as the person, develops? So is there any reference to that?
Yeah. It's an excellent question, Rajesh. I think the reason there is a medical link between. That's my view, being a physician myself. There is and I've thought about this and I've made some references as well. So there is, as you know, thymus is where during embryogenesis, thymus is where the recognition of the self and the non-self happens during embryogenesis for immunological recognition. So that differentiation between the self and the non-self from an immunological perspective happens in the thymus. Now, if Sridhar is still there online, he might be able to shed some thoughts on this. So a similar kind of process also apparently happens in the neocortex of the brain that also defines what is self and what is non-self during neurogenesis. So this kind of process happens, and it primarily happens in the thymus, and it makes you wonder why the Vedic rishis must have thought about the self being placed in the thymus gland, because that is where the self and the non-self discrimination happens during embryogenesis. So that is just one view. I don't know the real answer there, but that is one view.
I agree with you, Madhu. There is a prefrontal cortex component of self and non-self, which in some people can be. How we know this is by examples of case studies that's done on people with brain injury and autism, where this part is somehow not working properly. And also in young neonates, when they develop the first 3 years, this doesn't, it's not matured enough. So we do have examples from developmental and brain injury studies that some neural network is there or a structure is there in the prefrontal cortex, which determines that.
That is fascinating. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, anybody else has got any questions? Okay, the discussion, the amount of discussion that has happened for the past half an hour indicates the subject is very fascinating. And we'll thank Madhu once again for the wonderful lecture, and we'll all meet next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you,
Yes,
Madhu.
thank you, Madhu.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu.
Thank you, Madhu, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.